Hi, everybody. This is the first lesson in the trigonometry section of geometry. And before we even get into the trigonometry, what I want to do is give you a chance to learn some of the nuances that most teachers don't, the details that most teachers don't get into that I think might help. And to be specific, we're talking about right triangles in trigonometry, the beginnings. And I am making a separate lesson out of learning how to truly label a right triangle, or any triangle for that matter. And we're going to learn about the relative terms, which you'll see very shortly. And this is one of the things I want to get into. Objective 1, labeling a right triangle. Now, as you know, in a right triangle, there's one hypotenuse, the longest side, and then there's two legs. Now, these points here are called vertices. That's plural for vertex. This is vertex A. It is also angle A. That's vertex B, the point, and is also angle B, and so on. So one of the things I want to tell you is when we talk about naming a right triangle, the really, really short version. I wrote this out, and I'll fill this out, but you remember when we name sides, they're just these sides. That's a segment. It's got two definite endpoints, and segments are always named after their endpoints. So when we name the hypotenuse, for example, one of the names would be side AB. And you have to put line segment over it or it's wrong. Now, not only is it line segment AB or side AB, it's also segment BA. Two different names to express the same line segment, because segments are named after their endpoints. Look at leg 1, for example. Leg 1 has a name. It's called line segment AC, or it's also called line segment CA. They name the same line segment. What's the name for line segment for leg 2 right here? Well, you can call it line segment BC, but put a line segment over it, or line segment CB. As a side note, whenever you see two letters next to each other, it's not line segment CB, but when you don't see anything over it, it means the distance or the length of line segment CB, or the distance from C to point B. So we put a line segment to say that's just a line segment. Now here's the part that most teachers don't explain clearly. And I'm going to explain it to you. There is a third name for these sides, and you have to know this. Sides of a triangle are always named after their opposite angles. In other words, if you took angle A and if you imagined a line coming out of the dead center of angle A, and you keep going until you get to the side, guess what? That side is known to be the opposite side of angle A. So if that's angle A and you draw that imaginary line, that touches the opposite side of A. And the opposite side of angle A has a name. It's called lowercase a. So the line segment BC is also known as the line segment CB, but it's also known as lowercase a. So leg number 2 has another name. It's called side A. As a matter of fact, if you drew that an imaginary line out of the middle of angle B, and you kept going until you reached the side, that's the opposite side of angle B, right here. Line segment AC is the opposite side of angle B, because it's way on the other side of the triangle. So not only is this side known to be line segment AC or line segment CA, but it's also line segment B, lowercase b. It's named after its opposite angle. So angles and their opposite sides have the same letter. Now I'm going to ask you about one more pattern, but first we know that's line segment AB or line segment BA, but what's the third name for it? Well, if you draw an imaginary line out of angle C and you keep going until you touch that line segment, then we can call line segment AB lowercase c. And so for line segment AB, BA, it's also lowercase c. For line segment AC or CA, it's also lowercase b. So to understand this and to finish this up, notice that the angles are named or labeled with capital letters always. Vertices are always capital letters. But line segments are labeled with lowercase letters. And the single lowercase letter is always the same as its opposite angle. That's why just as a side note, that's why if you remember in your lives seeing this, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, that's the Pythagorean theorem. Notice that the Pythagorean theorem has always been written out with lowercase letters. Why? Because they represent the sides. Sides are always written with lowercase letters. Whenever you see a capital letter, that means you're talking about an angle. And now you know that naming the sides of a triangle is not random, but it's very, very exact and specific and precise. Sides are named after their opposite angles. Angles are named after their opposite sides. They always go together in pairs. Except the angles are uppercase, the sides are lowercase. So once you get that little piece of knowledge, notation, understanding notation makes this very, 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 very simple. So that's the lesson. The first thing I wanted you to know is something very basic. And one word that I don't want to just disregard or discount is the word opposite. Whenever we talk about opposite sides, we just draw an imaginary line from the angle to the other side, and that's called the opposite side. So if someone said, what's the opposite side of angle A? You just draw an imaginary line and say, oh, it's side BC, or lowercase a. Now, having said that, I'm going to do one problem as an example, and then we'll move on to the next concept. It says, here it is, like one more time. Label the sides using a single letter based upon the vertices for the right triangle below. So what you're supposed to have done here is, you see these little blanks here? Name the sides. In other words, we know this is side LP and PL. But if you look at the angle that's opposite, we get to angle F. So clearly, if you draw that imaginary line, the opposite side from angle F would be side lowercase f. So that side has three ways to name it. Side LP, line segment LP, or line segment PL, or just a lowercase f. Why is it lowercase f? Because it's got to match its opposite angle. So by that very same token, if that's angle P, then if you draw that imaginary line straight across, then this is going to be side lowercase p. I wrote it in cursive. And of course, what's the name of this side besides FP and PF? Lowercase l. And there's a cursive lowercase l. Now you get it. And for the last example, I did this kind of backwards. I labeled the sides, and you know the sides are labeled because those are lowercase letters. And if you want to know the name of their opposite angles, well, think of going backwards. Draw an imaginary line from the side of the triangle to its opposite angle. So what do you think the name of this angle would be? Well, since it's opposite H, then this has to be uppercase H. Naming this angle, draw an imaginary line coming out of that middle of that angle, and it always reaches its opposite side, which is R. So this has to be capital R, named after its opposite side. The side is lowercase r, the angle or the vertex is capital R. And finally, what letter do you think that's going to be? Well, since this point, if you draw that imaginary line through out of the middle of the angle, it touches the opposite side, which is D, so this has to be capital D. And I hope that helps you to make the correlation between the labeling of the side versus its corresponding opposite angle. They're the same letter, but the side is lowercase, the vertex is the uppercase. Okay, so that's the end of that little short lesson.